All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready. We will continue with the proceedings now. Thank you for your patience. I know it's warm in here. We'll endeavor to get these air conditioners working a little faster. Right, this is a high-level panel entitled Tracking Financial Flows to Nature-Based Solutions. It is co-organized in collaboration with UNEP Climate Finance Unit, UNEP FI, and the UN Science Policy Business Forum partners. This session will draw on insights of UNEP's State of Finance for Nature 2023 report, and will focus on several themes. I'm going to very, very quickly mention those, and then we'll get stuck right in. The current landscape of finance for NBS, just to try and get our head around how that looks. Nature negative financial flows, so the challenge posed by the significant nature negative flows, which amount to almost $7 trillion a year. Investment opportunities and challenges in Africa, so the specific context of Africa, and debt for climate and nature swaps. We heard Leila Benali, in fact we heard Inga Anderson, my apologies, talk about nature swaps briefly, and we heard a little bit about it this morning as well. So we have, we've got an hour to go through these things. We've got, as always, a fantastic panel to share their thoughts I'm going to quickly introduce everyone here now, so I don't have to do it again. Her Excellency Dr. Claudine Ouera, Minister of State for the Environment, Rwanda. I'm doing this in order, by the way. We have His Excellency Dr. Isias Adekunle Salako, Minister of State of Environment, Nigeria. Ms. Lakshmi Dewanthi, Deputy Minister, Director General of Climate Change, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry of the Republic of Indonesia. Next to her is Her Excellency Maria Susana Muhammad, Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development for Colombia. Where am I? Eva Meyerhofer, my apologies, Head of Environmental Policy, Lead Biodiversity Specialist, the European Investment Bank. We have Tony Goldner, who you heard from this morning, Executive Director for the TNFD. Reshma Shah is Group Director, Sustainability of Equity Group Holdings, and on the end is Florent Kaiser, the CEO of Global Forest Generation. We do have a remote participant. I'm not sure if he's here yet. We also heard from him this morning, Pavan Sukhdev, the CEO of Just Impact. If he turns up, we'll all know because he'll be on those screens behind us. Right. Let me get started, and Minister, there we are, welcome. I'm going to start with you, if I may. I'd like to actually, as I did this morning, start with the policy side, and then open it up. So, Minister Ouera, a broad question, how do we get all of this working, what we're talking about? Give us some examples of how Rwanda is leveraging finance for nature-based solutions. What is working in your country?
Thank you very much, moderator. Everyone here, Excellencies, all protocol observed, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to me to be part of this panel that will be discussing how to leverage the financial flows for increasing the uptake of nature-based solutions. This morning, we've learned a lot. This subject was discussed. But when it comes to put into the context, I would like to highlight some few things, as you just mentioned. The starting point, I would like just to say that Rwanda has an ambitious vision to be a climate resilient and carbon neutral by 2050. And this requires us around 11 billion just to be able just to reduce emission and to be climate resilient by 2030. So it's an ambitious goal, it's a long-term, and that requires short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategy. Just taking into consideration that the developing financing landscape is becoming increasingly complex, and it requires a more coherent and integrated approach in the financial instruments just to make sure that we come up with all the solutions that are sustainable, but that come just to respond to the really needs at the right time as well. And under what we call the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Sustainable Development, Rwanda committed to develop what we call the Integrated National Financing Framework. This is a strategic framework that aim just to monitor all those flows. Right now, the First Lady of Kenya highlighted the need to pull resources that come just to help, put into action, concrete action, but in a current way. This integrated national financing framework is been developed by Rwanda just to make sure that we come up with a strong instrument that help us even just to tap into innovative financing mechanism, and by focusing especially the green financing as well. So another strategic framework that I can highlight here is we are in the process of elaborating the climate and nature financing strategy, and the objective is similar, just to have an adequate tool that will support us transitioning investment toward a low carbon, climate resilient, and nature positive future. So those are kind of strategic framework. And in collaboration with other development partners, especially the World Bank, we've been able to undertake some studies. And this was especially after this post-COVID period, just to see what can work for Rwanda when it comes to the nature-based solution, and just to tackle into instruments like the green bond and the others. So, and lastly, something that is really important and that was discussed this morning is about just valuing and measuring the natural capital.
Yep.
Rwanda has been one of the pioneer countries implementing the natural capital accounting program, and this program aims just to make sure that we dispose adequate tool that will help us just to integrate the value of nature, environment, and the ecosystem services into our GDP, just to come up with the green GDP for the sustainable future. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Minister. And I will come back on international cooperation and collaboration. I really want to try and get to the bottom of this communication piece as well. Communication between, Tony mentioned it this morning, getting the scientists to talk with the guys who structure finance, getting the policy people to talk to the guys who structure finance, getting everyone to talk to each other. To the Minister from Nigeria, with in mind what we've just heard from Rwanda, give us a sense of how you are leveraging these solutions in your country to address environmental challenges. And I'd like also, if you could, to throw in there the role of local communities in these initiatives, how important that is.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here this evening to participate in this very important panel discussion. Nigeria is a member of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. And we are committed to protecting 30% of our planet, the land and the oceans by 2030. We recognize that climate change and economic activities like oil exploration, like mining, like agriculture, do impact negatively on nature. Our slogan is minimal pain for maximum gain. And we found that nature-based solutions offers us a good pathway to achieve this. We are combining environmental management approaches and measures to reduce disaster risks and climate impact using nature-based solutions like mangrove restoration, afforestation, agroforestry, urban greening, and other green infrastructure. And yes, the indigenous people and the local communities are playing a pivotal role in these efforts. As an example, the Great Green Wall and the hydrocarbon pollution remediation projects is empowering local youths and women. We train them, we give them grants, and they're able to raise seedlings, tree seedlings, mangrove seedlings, and they are registered to supply those seedlings to registered contractors who does afforestation projects with the government. So you find that the local communities, youth, women, are involved in the designing of the projects, in implementing, and in monitoring. We're providing clean cook stoves to local communities and also training them on how to do briquettes. All this reflects our strong approach to protect areas where indigenous and local communities live and work, so that they can once again live and work in harmony with healthy ecosystem and rich biodiversity. We look at our indigenous and local communities as the canary in the coal mine. And we believe that when indigenous people succeed, when our local communities are thriving, we can be confident that we're living in harmony with our ecosystem. We know that 55% of the global community depend on healthy ecosystem and health biodiversity. Therefore, protecting our local communities and prioritizing our indigenous communities, incentivizing their participation in protecting ecosystem and biodiversity is the only right thing to do. The coastal communities often comprises of indigenous people. And in Nigeria, we have close to 20 million of our population living along the coastal zones. And many of them are relying on the Atlantic Ocean for their livelihood and for the supply of protein in their diet. Therefore, expanding and strengthening protected areas and halting extinction and securing recovery of threatened species will not only be cheap, but the return on our investment will be enormous. Currently, the cost and benefit of protecting at least 30% of our planet by 2030 is not distributed equally. However, for us in the developing countries and those of us who are the most threatened ecosystems, we believe that inhabited indigenous people, the small and local communities, are very critical to our nature-based solutions. Therefore, we are working in harmony. We're ensuring that our projects reflect and emphasize nature-based solutions funded by budgets, funded by special presidential initiatives, and also in support from our development partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I want to go straight to the Deputy Minister from Indonesia and ask you about priorities in Indonesia, how you prioritize investments in these solutions, and to what extent you've been successful, I guess is, for want of a better word, in redirecting nature-negative finance flows towards more sustainable projects. How are things looking in Indonesia?
Thank you, and thank you for the question, and thank you for having me in this panel. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. One of our priorities is to strengthen our action for nature. That also important to achieve our SDGs agenda for sustainable recovery, as well as for ensuring the resilience against the crisis in the present as well as in the futures. So Indonesia government has taken corrective policies actions, especially in reducing the greenhouse gas emission, reducing the levels or the rate of deforestation as well as the forest degradations. And not only on the forest side, but also in the energy, through the energy transition mechanisms. So indeed, our priority actions on sustainable growth, including protection, conservation, sustainable use, and restorations, require a significant financing from all resources, from national, from international, as well as private and public. Let me share that Indonesia has taken a progressive steps to reform its public, environmental, and climate finance for the nature's positive, including first, we develop a climate public expenditure report at the sub-national level, as well as the implementations of climate budget tagging at the national levels, starting back in 2016. And second, the development of an innovative financing instrument, the Green Sukuk or Sharia bond in 2018, which aimed to accelerate progress toward the achievement of nationally determined contribution as well as the SDGs target. This Green Sukuk framework has now been developed into the SDGs government securities. the underlying framework issuance of SDGs bond and blue bonds, we call it blue bond, that can be utilized for the green sector as well. And third, the government of Indonesia established so-called Indonesian Environmental Fund Management Agencies that designed to encourage financing in environment and to ensure the sustainability of our environmental protections and management financing activities. And these agencies have successfully mobilized quite numbers of funds that granted as a revolving fund incentive for the environmental restorations in Indonesia at all levels. And the fourth, our nature positive financing is also encouraged through the implementation of proper program, which stand for Companies Performance Rating Assessment in Environmental Management. It is the environmental governance framework that aims and focus on ensuring compliance of companies against mandatory environmental regulations while promoting efficient resources use across the value chains. Proper is a thriving ecosystem for the science, policy, business, as well as the financial institution collaborations. So that's the experience of Indonesia in ensuring that our public finance as well as the private finance will go direct to the nature positive actions.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Deputy Minister. And look, we're going to delve a little deeper into both the public and the private in a second. I'll come to the others in a moment. I just want to hear first from the Minister from Colombia and get a sense first, as part of the response, what Colombia is doing, how you're aligning your financial strategies to bolster these sorts of investments. But I also want to hear about the role of national legislation versus voluntary action and how important that is in this process.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, the first thing is defining what the government wants to do, what are the priorities, and we have defined that we need to replant our territory according to the flows of water so that we don't have disasters, natural disasters, and integrally recovering watersheds, and we don't call them nature-based solutions, but ecosystem approach. How do we, at the same time, stop deforestation, which is our first source of emissions? So we are tackling climate change. At the same time, doing restoration, which will help us to reorganize the territory around water and create connectivity for biodiversity, but is at the same time our main strategy for adaptation. Because in the areas where we have degraded land, that's exactly where now we have disasters, when we have excess of water or we don't have water because of climate change, El Niño and La Niña. So when we talk about ecosystem approach, it's restoring the ecosystem so that we can create climate adaptation, biodiversity connectivity, and for us at the same time is a source of stopping emissions. Now, if you understand that, and especially in a very geographically challenging country like Colombia, which is for me like 5 countries in one, then you have a focus for investment that will give you multiple results. And we are shifting in avoiding spending money on environmental projects that are all scattered and giving a lot of money to small projects, and trying to concentrate regionally in how do we change landscapes and how do we then converge around environmental objectives that you can see impact. When you have that, then you create a common purpose around all stakeholders, and that common purpose makes sense in that context in terms of the benefits that the different stakeholders will have. Based on that, the second step was to create a stable financial flow of income for the fiscal space in the country for environment. Because it's very difficult when you're going to plan a restoration project when you have 1 year, one budget, and then the next year is cut because of fiscal restraints, and then you don't have the budget, so you cannot sustain the restoration. And environmental restoration is a process of years, decades. It's very easy to chop 1 hectare in a matter of 2 days. It's very difficult to recover the environmental functions of that hectare that could take years. Yeah. So in that process, we created a carbon tax. That carbon tax goes specifically by law towards the ecological restoration, climate action. So it cannot get into in the budget of the government and expend in whatever. It goes exactly for this ecological restoration. So now for some years, we have a stable source of income that then you can plan, and you can, based on that, bring other stakeholders to match your financing. That has given some stability to the environmental system to be able to create larger scale programs of restoration. And also in the tax law, companies may not pay the tax, but in 50%, but then they have to invest in ecological restoration. So we have created an incentive to build partnerships between companies and civil society and communities that are doing restoration projects, and now they can go and work with the companies.
And how just a very quick follow-up on that, how successful are you being in creating that?
Well, at different scales, I think you have to still see how to measure success. But on the first hand, I will say that a lot of civil society organizations, because of the legislation, have access now through partnership with the private sector that is trying to offset its carbon emissions to develop projects that before maybe they didn't have this income. On the other hand, it has given a stable income to government, to the environmental sector, and now we can, based on that, plan longer term. For example, we want to recover a very important, very large wetland, which is losing its hydrological capacity to regulate water and is creating a lot of disasters. Based on the income, stable income of the government, now we can plan for the next 5 years and we can commit budgets for that project. Based on that, we went also to the subnational governments and we asked them to put money as well. And now we double the amount of financing from the public budget. And then based on that, we will be working with the private sector, but it's not this like large investment. It's actually how that restoration, ecological restoration, creates economic opportunities. What type of economic opportunities? We have based our development plan in nature-based tourism. So the way we do the restoration has to create the community capacities to create now the possibility of tourism, so that we can also start creating the long-term flows of sustaining the restoration. One thing I think we are realizing is that many people want to make business with nature, but they want to do first the business and then see that the nature is restored. And I think it's the opposite. First you restore nature, and as nature is being restored, then you can create productivity and businesses out of that, because it is a serious process and not this financial speculation around offsets, around biodiversity offsets, carbon offsets, and at the end of the day, you don't have the restoration, you don't have the governance, and you don't have the reduction of emissions or the increase of biodiversity. That's why we really think that regulation is very important, setting clearly the governance, and also having transparency and long-term plans around the material results, the environmental impacts that this work is creating, and not a lot of this speculation that we're seeing around.
Okay, Minister, thank you very much indeed for that. And look, there was a lot of nodding going on the other side of the panel. So let me come to you, and please feel free to jump in from the minister, the policy side, if you feel you want to. Tony, if I could start with you. Look, we heard four perspectives from 3 continents there. I'd like to get a sense of what you think is working and what is not working. The need is there. The money's there. What continues to fall down in this process, Tony?
That's a difficult question. I think it's just building on my comments this morning, I think if we want to see a shift in the flow of capital, we have to see a change in behaviour amongst capital providers and amongst companies, and frankly amongst all of us as consumers too, as to Elizabeth's point this morning about the shiny green apple. And a change in behaviour will come from a change in mindset. So I think we've got, the mindset is starting to shift. I think we're still struggling to see investment models that business and finance can see, particularly going to scale. I think it's really interesting to hear the Colombian example of a carbon tax going into a dedicated fund for restoration. We're seeing a lot of stories shared on social media about a blue bond and a green bond, but when you look at the details, a lot of them are quite small. They've taken sometimes years to come to fruition. And so a lot of people who have money and want to get into nature restoration can't see the models, and the transaction time and the transaction costs are very large. And what we want to do is create models where the big pools of capitals can start to engage, because that's when we'll start to see a real shift in the scale of this problem. But we know that pension funds, for example, sovereign wealth funds, they can't justify doing deals at less than $300, $400, $500 million. So we've got an order of magnitude problem. And so at the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, we've spent the first two years very much looking at building a risk management and disclosure framework, as our name suggests. This year we're looking to spend more time lowering the costs of doing assessment and risk management, but also more time exploring what the archetypes for opportunities and investment opportunities might look like. Because we're hearing a lot of terms, but I actually don't think we've got a basic typology of nature-related investment opportunities that is broadly agreed.
How, just a follow-on from that, maybe it's the wrong way to phrase it, but how sharp are the TNFD's teeth? You know, how do you propose to influence global financial systems, to increase investment? What mechanisms do you have in place? Do you have mechanisms in place to do that effectively?
Well, ours is an influence game, we don't have regulatory powers. So we are a voluntary market-led initiative, essentially trying to shift the flow of capital using existing corporate and investment risk management practices. So, you know, companies can ignore us, governments can ignore us, but what we're finding is there's been a huge amount of engagement in our process. We announced in Davos a few weeks ago, 320 organizations already committed to using our disclosure framework. Governments are coming to us asking questions about how might they draw on our recommendations as they think about their regulatory landscape. So we have to influence, and that means we've got to come up with guidance and tools that are both science-based but also practical to implement. We've been very focused on trying to come up with things that are practical, cutting through the complexity of science, but not making it necessarily complicated to engage.
And good. Okay, Tony, thank you. Pavan, hopefully you can hear us. You spoke this morning of the importance of data and analytics, and you know, we're talking about trying to make this process run as smoothly as possible. Just talk to us briefly about the importance of data and the importance of analytics in facilitating the types of investment we're talking about here.
Well, thank you, and Your Excellencies and distinguished panelists. Glad to be here, calling in from Australia. I would say the importance of the data is the proof of the pudding, because one can use small examples, one can use inspiring examples, but for policy to change and for people's mindsets to change, as Tony spoke talking about, you need the data to convince them. And I'll just give one example to explain what I mean. Some of you may have heard of the so-called natural farming example from the state of Andhra Pradesh in my country, India. This has scaled, so genuinely has scaled, because it now covers 850,000 farmers out of a state which has got 6 million farmers. And they have demonstrated yields being higher by 8% on average, farm profits being higher by 49% on average, and this is for the 2 years that we studied this. They have demonstrated 1/3 lower health costs in people who use natural farming. And the whole thing is based on a women's self-help group-based organization called RYSS, which was created as a joint venture, a kind of public-private partnership, 20%
Yeah,
funded by the Azim Premji Foundation, APPI. This is Wipro, India's largest technology firm, and 80% funded by the local state of Andhra Pradesh. So now, the question is, would all these numbers that I'm reading to you, which are basically the results of a study that I had organized for this project, we have not only got the numbers with us, they are on Python. So anyone who wants to delve into them, most welcome. Please contact me. My email is with you guys.
Okay.
Anybody who wants to replicate that can use this data and can use the methodology. It's all documented. There's a massive report. This is an example of what is known as the TEEB for Agriculture and Food study. That was a study of the United Nations Environment Program done a few years ago, 2016, 2018. So
Okay.
here we have it. I mean, example of where actual change is happening on the ground thanks to a women's self-help group-led organization. But its replicability is so strong and the data, the power of the data is so strong is that now there is a draft proposal with the government of India as to how it can be taken to other states in India.
All right.
Based on this.
All right. Thank you very much. That sound, by the way, you can hear, Pavan, is the rain falling on the top of this tent. And hopefully everyone in the audience can still hear okay. I want to come to the EIB now. Eva, get a sense of how you're integrating biodiversity, environmental considerations into what you do, into your investment decisions. But also to the question I asked Tony, how is the EIB encouraging investment in these sorts of solutions? What are you doing?
Thank you. Good afternoon. So there are a couple of things. I mean, we, as a part of the multilateral development bank family, of course, we've got our safeguard policies in place for now about 2 decades that do integrate biodiversity and ecosystems. And they, of course, look at the application and the implementation of our do no harm principle, but also in line with the mitigation hierarchy. It does have certain challenges, and one thing that we have moved with our new standard that came out in 2022, moved from a no net loss of biodiversity to a no loss, and that has quite a few challenges and complications with it. But one thing that we do look at now more intensively is also biodiversity, not through just a pure conservation lens, but also making sure that the role of indigenous and traditional communities, as well as women, is taken on board and captured. The other side, I mean, and that's also part of the work that certainly the TNFD has been doing, is we are looking at developing a biodiversity risk score so that we look at the exposure of our clients and our promoters to biodiversity risk. And in the medium term, what we would like to see this biodiversity risk score do is actually be part not only of the credit analysis, but of the pricing of our loans. So the higher the dependency and the risk, the more expensive the loan is, certainly with regards to the fact that they may not have a transition or a credible plan. And coming to that certainly is moving forward with our Paris alignment framework. We have heard several times that the buffering capacity of ecosystems is absolutely critical if we want to meet our 1.5 degree target, and therefore we need to put nature at the heart of our transition plans. So that is something that we look at in terms of also the trade-offs.
Can you give us some examples, Eva, of successful solutions, nature-based solutions funded by the bank?
Yes, so there's one which, of course, and I think the ministers have all highlighted the fact that it is very long-term. So in order to look at nature-based solutions, I think Tony mentioned, they are relatively small scale today, and what we see is basically an integration of nature-based solutions in larger infrastructure. And one is, of course, it's a European project, but it's a very successful project, is the river restoration project of the Emscher River in northeast Germany. And the entry point, interestingly enough, for this river restoration, which took 20 years to reach the real level where you see the change in ecological integrity, the functioning of the natural systems, is wastewater treatment.
Yeah.
So we spent, or the total project costs for this, then it becomes interesting, is 5 billion euros, but over a period of 20 years. And we are now seeing the impact of that river restoration, not only in terms of flood protection, but water quality, erosion control, and also recreational value. From a very polluted river, this was in pretty much in the industrial sector or region of the Ruhr in Germany, so extremely polluted in the 1900s. So, but it's very long term, and where we see the clash and the problem as a financial institutions are the timelines. So the timelines between restoration and the impact of restoration versus the timeline for investors to get their interest on the benefits.
Yeah. Okay, good. Eva, thank you. Reshma, I want to come to you on the back of what Tony was saying. Equity Bankers announced its commitment to using, I think I'm right in saying, TNFD recommendations in your operations. What are the implications of that? What are the difficulties of that? What is the ease in doing that? Give us a sense of how that works.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. The first, I'd say, difficulty or challenge is voluntarily taking on additional requirements. When we think about it, a lot of people think of it still as a risk-based and think of it as compliance. And therefore, when you look at what the regulations currently are, when you're required to go over and above that, you get initially a lot of internal challenges, I would say, because you're complicating the business. You are, in a financial sector, you'll be told you're being a blocker to lending because you're bringing in too many considerations. Those are usually the kind of first thoughts that come about. The way to overcome them, that's how we've done it, is really to understand how does nature impact our business and how does it impact with respect to our vision. But also from a legislative perspective is get our people to understand equity is not just in one country, we're in 6 countries. And legislation is developing significantly in the area. And we want to be able to be ahead of that and to be compliant with that. So we've done a lot of work around addressing some of those challenges by understanding where the risks are, but more importantly, where the value is. And I think this is the turning point. And if we can show our business how we can give our clients additional value by helping them to understand where nature-based risks are for their business, how those risks affect us, for example, credit risk, reputational risk, etc., but also how we can go and work with our clients and fund some of those solutions.
Can you give us some, sorry to put you on the spot here, can you give us some examples of that? Of how, anecdotally, how a project that you use to show your investors of the value, of the return down the line?
Yeah, so we are still quite early in that, but we've used a lot of case studies. But where we are at the moment, we've done a heat map of 2 of our major sectors. And of those heat maps, we've identified the key risks, but we've gone and shown them where the opportunities are. And we are at that point of quantifying that. So that's where they can see now, from a commercial perspective. The other critical thing I'd say in all of this is understanding what is a nature-based solution, that it's not a standalone solution. It's usually part of a bigger project. But more importantly, nature-based solutions are not always very geographical specific. So when it comes to a client, a company, it's very difficult to implement something like that. So some of the other examples we've used to get across is where we're working with partners, where we're working with government to show how equity can partner to be part of that solution. So we're currently looking at something with the World Bank around the blue economy as an example.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And Florent, I want to bring you in here, and then I'll come back to the ministers. Global forest generation, give us a sense of how you assess, how you select projects for investment, and give us a sense of how you think philanthropy and private investment can work together. And this is something we've talked a lot. I remember talking a lot about this in Glasgow. I remember talking a lot about this in Dubai. There are always sessions on this. The philanthropy and the finance piece and investable projects and who should you point fingers at, et cetera, et cetera. Just give us your sense.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, particularly you in Colombia, which touched a lot on the work that we do. And so before I answer that, I will give you a little bit of context why I say that. So I represent here today Acción Andina, which is a...
You're going to have to shout pretty loudly, I think.
Which is a continent-scale Andean-wide program to restore and protect high Andean ecosystems. And we're delighted that later today, will be awarded, selected by the UN as one of the world's restoration flagships initiative, which brings a lot of political highlights to the region. So what is happening in the Andes is, depending a little bit on the area, but in a nutshell, climate change is hitting hard. The glaciers, which hold an incredible capacity of water for the continent, are melting away, and they will melt away. We know that, most of them. 70%, I think, by 2040, which is an incredible number. The headwaters, the glaciers and headwaters of the Andes host the waters not only for the Amazon rainforest and feeds into that system, but also for hundreds of millions of people on the coasts and multi-million cities and communities all across the continent. Acción Andina started 5 years ago based on decades of work of incredible leaders on the ground at the community level that knew how to work with the local people, revive their ancestral principles, mostly to abbreviate here, of the ex-Inca community, the ex-Inca empire that crossed really from almost Colombia down to Patagonia, and revive ancestral principles that allowed them to unite tens of thousands of people to actually build their empires in that time, along with incredible water infrastructure, incredible, an entire empire consisting of many economical and social bastions. It was born 5 years ago when I met our co-founder, Constantino Auca, which was selected a champion of the earth by the UN last year. And I asked him, Tino, you have understood how to mobilize thousands of people to plant up to 100,000 trees per day, native trees only, to restore some of the high Andean ecosystems. What's next for you? And Tino mentioned, my mission, my goal is to bring that again across the entire Andean continent. So I'll start now to answer your question.
Okay.
And the reason being, we knew this is a continental scale challenge, and it represents the challenge at a similar scale that we have all around the world. Yeah. We knew we needed to get started at the communal level. Now, looking at the finance arena and available, finance options was pretty hard to get a massive program spreading across countries. Philanthropy came in early stage to allow us to demonstrate the model, to demonstrate we can work with communities. And I'm happy to report over the last 5 years, we started with a few hundred people. We have now over 30,000 people spreading 5 countries, soon Colombia, actually this year, that will be involved in this program. Now we're at 5 years. We're recognized at the UN flagship. It is now that it's going to be very interesting. How do we utilize philanthropy to date to build out and access some of the more and more available fundings from nature-based solutions that are out there? And the last thing I will mention here, which very much supports your point before, we have to really think, when we talk about market-based mechanisms, and I definitely am convinced there is a space for it, it cannot be the only viable mechanism. Ultimately, in the Andes, looking at the water, looking at the communities, we're restoring a public and a social good. We have to activate the leadership, not only at the local level, but the leadership among all of us, especially also involving at the government level, to break is a strong word, but to move beyond current systems. It cannot be that some of the major investments that we have possible today takes up to 5-6 years to actually land the money on the ground. And quite often when we say on the ground, and we speak at the multilateral level, at best, that reaches a subnational level. The communities will tell you the the distance between the underground by the international community and the underground where we actually work on implementation is still abysmal. This is where we need to focus.
Yeah, okay, very good. Florent, thank you. Sorry, Tony, did you want to come in? Oh, sorry, I thought you were looking at me. Okay, very good, thank you. Nature is providing our soundtrack for this session and doing a good job of it too. I want to come back to the ministers if I can, and maybe start with the Minister for Colombia and talk a little bit about international cooperation, about collaboration in general, about communication between all these different parts which make up, of course, this forum that we're talking at today. Where are the biggest challenges, would you say? And what could you hold up as an example of really effective collaboration?
I think, and it's also a challenge for the government, that in between the need on the ground, as you were mentioning, and the political will and the money, in between those two things, there is bureaucracy. And bureaucracy is a difficult monster to go through, because it actually is not aligned with the dynamic of change that you need to put on the ground. Even what I described before, from the government point of view, for me the biggest challenge is how to move through bureaucracy to make things happen on the ground. So international cooperation and philanthropy, in our case, has been very useful to put things to work and try models at a certain scale that we can then take out from the government and work further, like build from that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's to create capacity, but that capacity has to be taken by governance of communities and institutions. Otherwise, it's very short-term live. And I think this is the situation.
You're doing a very good job shouting over this rain.
Try.
Can everyone hear okay?
God bless
Yeah.
the rain.
You can, yeah. To one of the other ministers, maybe the Minister for Rwanda, I'd like you to build on that bureaucracy piece and the challenges of that when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to communication, and then ultimately when it comes to cooperation internationally. What is your experience in Rwanda?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure if maybe they can hear me very well since it's raining. Yeah, yes, what they highlighted is true. When it comes to the financial flow, that goes maybe to the right direction, especially where the needs occurs. We found a kind of imbalance. Yes, the need is there, but the financial flow sometimes is not responding to the needs. So what we've been doing in Rwanda is just to make sure that we establish a kind of sustainable finance roadmap. We did that, and this was launched during the last COP27. And having that, we are sure that we have a kind of compiled instrument that help, a kind of tool that help investors and the lenders just to come within a consistent and integrated framework. I think in terms of readiness, countries need to make sure that they are ready by developing bankable projects that require just to, fulfill this criteria of being nature-based solutions. You've been asking what kind of project had been implemented under every country. And in Rwanda, we can highlight a number of projects, and the big project that are really making impact in terms of, and that are qualified as a nature-based solution in all corners, in all sectors of the economy. So I can insist by saying that having this integrated framework that help pool all the resources, but once the resources are there, you need to make sure that you are ready. You know what you are going to implement, this prioritization. So we have a number of priorities, we have those framework, and now we've started exploring how to expand with the carbon markets, for example. This was launched during the last COP as well. It's another innovative financing mechanism to to tackle this climate finance, which is a growing stream investment in Rwanda. So we have explored different windows under different angles to make sure that all segments, whether it's a public or private sectors, they can tackle those investments, and we try to create incentives.
Yes, yes.
Because we know that business people, what they see now, it's a quick profit, but to let them understand that sustainability matters, you need to create incentive in the meantime and the alternative solutions.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, it is quite a storm out there, isn't it? I think we're holding in here, though. I don't see any leaks yet. Raise your hand if you see one. Oh, it is? Okay. Okay. Move seats. I don't know if the minister from Nigeria wants to add to what we heard just now from Rwanda on that international cooperation piece. And then I just want to get a couple of final comments. I know we've got a couple of interventions from the floor as well, and we're running out of time. But go ahead, Minister.
Thank you very much. Well, I think first we can see that we are all at the mercy of nature. The loudest speaker cannot overcome the sound of nature. So we must learn to live in harmony and respect nature. Talking about collaboration internationally, I think ECOWAS sub-region, as a start, is probably the most collaborative sub-region in terms of nature issues, climate action, and developing regional and sub-regional pathways to address some of these challenges. The ECOWAS sub-region repeatedly has demonstrated this in CITES, in CBD, in BBNJ. ECOWAS has always been collaborative. Only 3 months ago, the ECOWAS countries adopted a regional commitment to promptly ratify the newly adopted High Seas Treaty, as well as prioritize recommendations to fast-track its ratification. About a week ago, we hosted in Nigeria the ECOWAS sub-region again, namely Benin, Cabo Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, Gambia, Ghana, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Togo, and of course the host country, Nigeria. And we're able to adopt an ambitious, innovative, practical measures that will allow our sub-region to work together towards the global goal of 30 by 30.
Okay, thank you.
So, ECOWAS is an example
Yes.
of sub-regional collaboration. The missing link usually is always the level of ambitious investment and financing that is needed. I believe that just as has been mentioned, investors also must look at nature investment as social investment. Long-term return doesn't come quickly, and it is when we have that kind of mindset that we can scale up in a very good scale to properly achieve some of the global targets for nature. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. Look, I've got a time for a couple more questions on the panel, and then there are a couple of interventions from the floor. Not that anyone's really want to go anywhere after this, right? Or at least not for the next few minutes. Tony, what public strategies do you consider to be the most effective in realigning nature negative flows? What public strategies that you've seen? And I'll ask the same question to Pravan in a moment.
Well, I think, one of the foundations that we have to get right is this growing interest in the term nature positive. A lot of people are getting very excited about what nature positive means. It's not a term that there is a UN definition on. It didn't make its way into the Global Biodiversity Framework. So TNFD and 26 other organizations came together to form the Nature Positive Initiative to provide us with a very clear definition to ground the shift in the flow of capital that we want to see. So I think actually we need to get the foundations right. One of them is definitions, and a second one is around measurement and metrics. And at TNFD, we've been very clear that companies and capital providers need to be very explicit about the difference of doing less bad on the one hand and doing good on the other hand. What we don't want to see is a confusion between the two. Reducing your plastic consumption is doing less bad. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a nature positive company or you're contributing to nature positive outcomes. So we have called for very clear reporting of negative impacts as distinct from positive impacts. And then we have to be, we think, quite careful in the use of net biodiversity measures, and there's a lot of interest around those, as well as things like biodiversity footprint measures, because it can be very easy when we try and distill everything into a single number. That can be very seductive, but it can also be very misleading for investors who don't know how to use those numbers and those metrics appropriately. So I would say, I'm not sure I have a direct answer to your very difficult question, but I'd say we really have to focus now on getting the foundations right, both the definitions and the metrics.
Yeah, okay, good. Look, Pavan, I was going to come to you, but we're having real difficulty hearing. I don't know how easy it is to hear you. We've got a couple of interventions from the floor that I want to go to first, if I may. And please do keep these tight. Please do keep these very brief. Stephen Steck, Senior Research Fellow, the Central European University. Stephen, are you around? Yeah. Oh, you're not Stephen. Okay. Yeah, grab a microphone. Yeah, there you go.
I'm just speaking instead of Stephen.
Please do, yeah. Thank you.
Jacob McGlade, also from Nature Group Science. I'm going to shout. So I think our view from the science is that in the nature-based solution space, it doesn't just come from academic research. We're talking about many people are engaged in nature-based solutions. So what we want to do is to reach out to those wider communities, citizen scientists and others who can help gather the evidence. But then that comes to the very root of this, which is that if you want to gather evidence that will persuade the financial flows, then it needs to be consistent, it needs to have robustness, and it needs to have an oversight. So what we're really calling for is a broader picture of that social and natural sciences that will bring the kind of confidence the financial markets really need, but it needs to be more frequent. There's no point in looking at nature every 5-10 years. You need to look at it very frequently. So I'll just leave you with maybe one metric, which I find fascinating. I love TNFD, I love all the others. What makes it real is I have people around the world who are loving the idea of going from 1 livelihood per hectare and after
Good, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Yeah, good. Jody Ann Wang, policy researcher, Grantham Institute. Jody Ann, are you in the audience? No? No, Jody Ann's not there. Okay, all right. Pavan, I'm going to try you just on that one question on public strategies and which ones you consider to be the most effective. Be interested to get your thoughts on that with the cap that you wear. If you can hear me okay, give that one a shot quickly.
Sure. I think the first and most important thing is to create educational support to be able to take, in the example I gave you, the farmers up the curve on techniques and methodologies. And of course, what Tony mentioned in terms of having proper definitions matters. I mean, definition of natural farming is one that does not use chemical pesticides or fertilizers and recognizes that actually agriculture is about biology, not chemistry. And that what you need to do is to increase the fertility of the soil through adding bacteria and using natural ingredients for doing that, and so on. And then comes the whole issue of financing, but this is not about megabucks. This is about ensuring that those who are the agents who benefit, in other words, the farmers in this case, have sufficient financing through their self-help groups and so on, which is small amounts of financing, but appropriately targeted to those who need it and not into the waste of intermediaries and processing systems, as tends to be very often the case. So I'd say education, guidelines on the how to go about it, clear definitions, and importance of metrics and standards at a later stage, as and when the system actually gets going. These are some of the elements of success that I've seen when things really scale. The example I talked to you has got 850,000 farmers moving in a completely different direction from chemical farming.
All right. Ooh, excuse me. Pavan, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for bearing with us. As I said, with the soundtrack that we've got. Look, I'm very wary of the time here, so I do want to wrap things up, because there is another session that it's going to happen right on the back of this one. In fact, it's the high-integrity carbon market session that Shireen and Joe will run. So I want to thank everyone on the panel. It's been been slightly different because we've had to scream at each other. But hopefully everyone heard the points that were made. And thank you to all of the ministers for joining us. We appreciate your participation. Thank you to the rest of you as well. And we hope you enjoyed the panel, everyone. Thanks very much indeed.